Hey, everybody, come on in. Welcome, welcome. What we do is we bring in product experts to share their insights. It's always with a focus on the expertise that they bring, the experience that product experts have brought over the years. And it's always with the focus on the content, the learning, and the sharing. So today is going to be recorded and it is going to be shared with you, and you are going to have a chance to ask questions as well. Make use of the chat and also make use of the Q&A section as well. Before we kick off, a little bit about ProdPad before we get started. This is a tool that was built by myself and my co-founder, Simon. We were product managers ourselves and we needed something to do our own jobs. Tools like this just didn't exist. We needed something to help keep track of the experiments we were running in order to hit our business objectives and to solve our customers' problems, and to keep tabs on all the ideas and feedback and everything that made up our backlog. So building ProdPad gave us control and organization and transparency. And it wasn't long before we started sharing it with other product people around us. And today it's used by thousands of teams around the world. So it's absolutely free to try. And we even have a sandbox mode where it has example product management data. So you can see how things like lean roadmaps and OKRs and experiments and everything all fits together into a product management space that you can try out and use yourself. And our team is made up of product people. So I really encourage you to start a trial today and then get in touch. Let us know how it's working out for you. Would love to get your feedback. And so today we're joined by Emily Tate. And I'm super excited to introduce you to Emily because I've actually had a chance to work with Emily. I'm not sure if many of you, but I'm one of the founders of Mind the Product. It's something that I started up many years ago, around the same time that I started FraudPad. How I know Emily is she was an early Product Tank organizer. And Product Tank is the series of meetups that are run all around the world. And at the time, Emily was living in Dallas and she was an organizer for the product tanks in Dallas. And she was a big Mind the Product fan. And long story short, she just got involved with the conference, got involved with the community, got to know the founding team and us. And it wasn't long before we brought her into the fold and she started getting more and more involved. And she ended up playing a wide range of roles with Mind the Product. The organization has shifted hugely with the market growing. The market's absolutely exploded over the last 10 years. And of course, with the changing times as well. And so today, she's the managing director of Mind the Product. And it's amazing to get a chance to work with her from those early days through to where she is now. And among other things, she curates and MCs the main stage of MTPCon. And for those of you who don't know, MTPCon is the big product management conference that the Mind the Product team runs. And it's actually next week. It's making a big return to the actual big stage, an in real life conference, which is really exciting. It's going to be completely live streamed as well, which is going to make it a unique hybrid event. I'm going to be in the live version, but also I'm going to be hosting some digital roundtable conversations. So taking advantage of the hybridity of the whole thing, which is going to be great. So wherever you are, you can join in for the London one next week. A little bit more about Emily. So besides being managing director at MTP, she has over 15 years of experience in product leadership, and she's worked with teams across a bunch of different industries and at all stages of the product development. But she's got a particular soft spot for the travel industry, where she started her career in product. And arguably, it's the travel industry has got to be one of the toughest nuts to crack in terms of gaining agility in the face of an industry that really wants predictability. And so that's why she's going to be one of the experts who's going to be excellent to talk to us about this today. So today's topic is all about how to bring agility into organizations who really want that predictability.
Yeah.
Emily, thank you so much for joining us here today, and great to have you here. I love this topic when you brought this up, this idea of bringing agility in for companies who are built for predictability. But what do you mean by organizations built for predictability? What are some signs of companies in this state?
Yeah. So when I think about these kind of predictability first organizations, it's all of the big companies that have massive processes that can get in the way of a lot of the things that we want to do in a modern product management organization. I think when I look at companies that fit this mold, typically they have things like big budget planning cycles with top-down funding. So you have to determine what you're building a year in advance. They typically have many portfolios of products that are all trying to either interact with each other or compete for the same resources at a minimum. So that kind of has an impact on the things that you're doing. And really just places that have built up a lot of it won't work here mentalities, I would say. And that are, I would say, and fairly often they are public companies as well that are driven by Wall Street and quarterly earnings and places that you can't really just wing the roadmap without bigger impacts beyond the product.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The fact that companies are public at that point in time, they basically have this fiduciary duty to increase shareholder value. And in order to do that, they've got to be able to predict where it's going. And it just changes the dynamic so much, doesn't it?
Yeah, it definitely does. And it's that thing of we always talk about it depends in product. And that's my favorite phrase. I say it way too often to the point where my family will occasionally ask me a question and be like, don't say it depends, just give me an answer. And unfortunately, when you're doing Wall Street reporting, you can't be like, it depends. You know, they want to know what things have happened, what the hard numbers are, and what your plans are. The other big thing I would say in a lot of these organizations is they're heavily sales led often. So, companies that where they're signing contracts based on what you will build, not what you have today. And so it gets into that mindset of, I need this in order to fulfill a contract. So that predictability becomes really important.
Yeah. And I find that so bizarre that sales-led way is the more predictable way, because you'd almost imagine that selling what you have would be more predictable, really, than trying to sell things that you don't have and trying to come up with the plan as you actually build it. But somehow the buck ends up being passed to the product people to fill that gap of predictability.
Yeah, it's all about the incentives at that point. So, the sales team is incentivized on a deal. They don't actually care about, in general, that's a really terrible generalization, but they often aren't as concerned with what happens after the sale, especially when they are paid on commission. And so when you're in that sales led world, what they're wanting is a yes. They want to be able to say yes to any question that the customer has. So if the customer says, does your product do this? Or we would like something that does this. If they can't easily say yes, they want to find a way to say, not now, but I can make it happen. And especially when this has been happening for a long time. And back 20 years ago, custom software was the thing. Everything was customized. Everything was the concept today of this standardized SaaS that everyone gets the same thing, maybe with a few light configurations, was not the thing. It was you built software. It was installed on-prem at the customer site. And you had a big delivery period where a chunk of it was doing custom development work. When those organizations are trying to shift into a more modern way of working or into a more agile way of working, you have customers who have been your customer for 15, 20 years who have always been told yes. And it's really hard to go back and say, I know that we have always taken your money and built the thing you wanted, but now we're not going to take your money to build this thing. It's just a hard mental shift.
So they're very much used to that almost a service-driven model. And this shift to much more of a product-driven model is just uncomfortable for the customers themselves.
Yeah, we had development teams. We had entire development teams that were solely existing to maintain a single airline's version of a given software. And even as we were trying to move everyone over into the most modern stuff and into the latest stuff, they had all of these specific customizations that we couldn't stop supporting, which then, of course, fed into this other really weird cycle where we would do updates to the main system. We couldn't support those in the old super custom. It just didn't work with the old system that we were maintaining. And then that customer would be mad that they don't have the new stuff. And they're saying, this product is terrible because it doesn't do any of the good stuff. And it's, yes, because you wanted all of these customizations. And I can't replicate all of those customizations every time I put out a new version. So it's It's just a slow shift into that mindset that we can bring customers along with us and sell the vision of what we're doing as opposed to just saying yes to anything that they ask for.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And actually, she in the chat here mentioned that they'd add B2B as a criteria, which sounds like it's implied with the fact that it seems to be so client driven, right? You don't see this need for predictability built into B2C companies as much, do we?
I don't think so. I am sure that there are examples of B2C companies, probably in some very specific industries. Maybe even not, though. I was about to say tax prep, things like Intuit, but I think that Intuit actually does a decent job of being pretty agile and lowercase agile, as I like to say. Not the uppercase agile processes, but actual, I should just start saying nimble.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really interesting is that it's actually Jock has just added there. There's a high cost bar for customers in.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's just the thing of you haven't built that one-to-one relationship. Typically to see you don't have that, you're not signing a contract and building the thing.
Yeah.
You have a thing and someone can buy it or not. And so you kind of don't get quite into those same conversations.
Well, yeah, and this is one of the problems that I see in a lot of companies is that they end up in this what I call the agency trap, right? They end up getting stuck in this pattern of building things out for customers because the customers ask and are able to provide some cash, which seems like a good idea in the short term because cash, I mean, cash feels good, right? Like,
Yeah.
Pays the bills, pays payroll, right? Really nice things to have, but it takes away your time. All the you're spending delivering customizations for one customer is time that you can't spend finding interesting problems to solve for the bigger, wider market. And it doesn't feel like you're losing much, particularly because you're earning cash. But if you sell off, the month of, August to one customer and the month of September to another customer, and, every month is sold off to a different customer, and you're just getting cash for that month you never actually get the chance to really, really flex and figure out what the bigger, more interesting problems are. And, arguably, this is why agencies don't scale and why product companies do. They actually spend the time, they force themselves to do discovery and not just get stuck in delivery of whatever it is that some client has come to them with as their next idea.
Yeah, it definitely, especially when you start thinking about, I just remember so many times of doing big gap analyses and figuring out, like, okay, we want this field to say this thing. We want this field to say this thing. And the thing that I always wanted to say that you can't really say to the customer at the end of the day is, I know you think you're really special and really different, but you're not. Honestly, like I've worked with hundreds of your exact profile of company. You all have the same problem. You're all solving it in the same way. I know that you think that you are a super special snowflake, but
yeah,
we can solve this for everyone at the same time.
But just with these tiny little configurations, so it's always that last mile that's really difficult.
Yes. And the thing is that last mile becomes the sticking point.
Yeah.
But if you really break it down, is that actually going to hinder your business?
Yeah.
Is the fact that this button is on this screen and not on this screen going to be the thing that keeps you from being able to do your job well? Probably not. And the thing that I would also then say to the sales team is that thing actually going to kill this sale? I know right now it feels like this deal is dead if I can't tell them yes on this thing, but so often it's really not. It's a negotiating point. And you've got people in this who are built to negotiate. So you have to negotiate back.
Right. It's like the just one more feature fallacy, that you're just one more feature away from that hockey stick growth or from closing that deal or whatever. There's always that one more feature, and it's never true.
Nope.
If that were true, then we would just build one more feature and then we'd all be out of jobs. But there's always another feature after that needs to be done according to the customers in the market and the sales team and everybody else.
And the really fun part is when you get into that just one more feature, whether it's from a sales driven or even from your internal of okay, here's the things that we want to build. You also get into this mindset of like everyone inflates their business cases of what they think they can build. And so if we build this one feature, it's going to drive so many more sales. It's going to bring us 500,000 new users. It's going to increase our revenue by this much. And then no one ever actually goes back to see what happens with those. And so people get their funding based on the big business cases that they've built. And then they build the thing, and then it doesn't ever, not ever, but it rarely actually does what we wanted it to. I had a case where there was a partnership that basically my team got told from the CEO level that you will do a deal with this partner. You will make something happen. We ended up spending about $250,000 when we added up all the development hours and everything else, building out some special features for this partnership. And their end of the deal was literally they were going to bring us 500,000 new users. About 6 months into it, we started looking at the results of this. They had brought us 20 new users.
Ooh.
And those users were not very engaged. At some point, this integration broke. And we finally got a customer support ticket about it saying, oh, this special feature is not working. And we went back and looked at the code and realized it was broken. And we realized when it broke, because of the release in which we could figure out that would have made it stop working, it had been broken for 4 months and nobody knew. It was that unimportant of a thing. But to the team who pitched this, we signed the deal and we got the thing built. It's a success. So I think I have started calling this mentality the hopeful visionary mentality. So we talk about the feature factory, and John Cutler coined that phrase around just building out the feature. And the feature is the measure of success is, did we build the feature? I basically have said, take a feature factory and add a business plan, and you've got a hopeful visionary. And it's effectively, everyone does everything right up front. So we define the goals, we define the metrics we're going to look at. We think we know what the benefit's going to be. We know what the customer value is. And we build up this massive business case, and everyone's really proud of themselves. And then they put the business case on a shelf, never return to look at it again. And we build the feature, and then we're in the feature factory mode. So I see everywhere in these large B2B predictability driven organizations. So I wrote an article on it a while ago of kind of different types of organizations and how they use metrics. And I think that this is maybe the hardest one to combat, because you think you're doing a good job by defining everything up front, but it's that returning back that is so important.
Yeah, and teams need to have that discipline to go back and actually check that stuff. But it's not just about the discipline, it's about the having the permission and the time and the space to do. Because individuals get that they're supposed to do the whole build, measure, learn cycle. They get that. You tell an individual about this thing, and they're like, yeah, I totally get that we should try little things, do little tests, and then see if they worked, and then iterate our work based on that. Any individual gets that. But if you try to implement that in the organization, it seems to just fall over. It falls flat at every space. And it's often because the organization doesn't make time for it. It doesn't make space for it. It doesn't have people in the right roles to organize these things. For example, you have things like a million different ways of running Scrum and Agile and things like that, which are all very much focused around just building things. How many points can we get out the door? We're pointing really hard now. We're big velocity, great, but nothing really around the idea of who follows up on this, whose job is it to actually check that this is actually happening? What tools do we have in place to check that we're doing discovery up front and validation at the tail end? A lot of tools, a lot of organizations are just missing this part of things.
Yeah, it's because nobody gets funded on results. Nobody gets funded on having Slack in their roadmap. So you build out your roadmap, and the way that you get your funding is convincing the executives how much you're going to do. If you give me this much money, I can build this much stuff. And that case can't look like I'm going to take 6 months to build, measure, and learn a thing and go back and iterate. It's I'm going to build the thing, and I'm going to build the next thing, and then I'm going to build the next thing. And so it's almost like you don't have an opportunity to talk about the learnings and how you iterate until the next budget cycle, which is typically a year away. And then if you try to go back and say, we learned a thing about the thing we built and we want to iterate on it, the mentality tends to be, but we already built that. Why are you? So did you not do it right? Are you terrible at your job? And no, I'm great at my job. I did really well. So I'm not going to go revisit that. I'm going to go on to the next shiny object.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you said something earlier about how we used to build things, and Mark had a great response to that. That's just wild. We've come a long way since then. And yeah, we have. I think as smaller companies, we've really embraced the lean. We've really embraced the idea of agile. And you start seeing two different schools of thought. You see some companies who are just absolutely into it. They get it and they work this way. And then some companies, you talk to product managers who are like, I can't imagine being able to work like that. And it's heartbreaking to see this divide between those who do and those that don't. But the reality is that some companies are just in this non agile, much more predictable mindset versus the other, the more lean way. What companies aren't born in this predictable,
Yeah.
fixed mindset? How are they made? Where do they come from?
Yeah. I think so. The biggest thing that causes this heavy organization is layers and layers of process, layers of red tape. And I think the thing that we have to remember is that those didn't appear overnight and they typically started for a reason. So every annoying process or checkpoint or form you have to fill out comes because something happened in the organization and people want to avoid it happening again. We had a case at one point in a company I was with where there was a massive outage in our data center. Again, this was in the travel industry. We ran airline operations, literally shut down flights in most of the airports in the US for hours or something. I don't remember the amount of time. It may not even been that long, but it cost airlines hundreds of millions of dollars, made front page news all over the country because it took down systems that check people in for flights and make sure that the crew is legally allowed to fly because they haven't been working for too long and things like that. Clearly, big catastrophic thing. It was because a release went out that apparently had some bugs that crashed a bunch of stuff, and then there wasn't a good rollback plan. And so they couldn't quickly roll it back. And it was a big issue of getting it back up and running. So, of course, it's how can we avoid this happening again? Basically, there was a data center freeze that nothing could be released for a bit while they got it all stabilized. Cool, understand that. Then it became there's a 3-day waiting period between you submit a change request and when you can do the release. And you have to document everything you've done, that you've done extensive regression testing, that you are 100% confident this is not going to take down the data center, and that you have a documented rollback plan and you've done rollback testing. So that was their plan to fix this. That just meant everything was really backed up. There was a huge backlog of releases that this committee could get through and evaluate. They were burning out the people who were doing the evaluation of this because they were having to be on call 24 hours a day, taking calls at 10 o'clock at night to review patches and bug fixes and tiny little things. And then what people started doing was gaming that system. And so if you thought you might need to have a release in 3 days, you submitted your release 3 days early, then you scrambled in those 3 days to put together your rollback plan and do your regression testing and do all the things. And then you basically released it at the same time that it was the same hastily put together regression plan and everything else that went along with it. And so now you just have the same risky behavior, but with a 3-day waiting period. So it did not solve the problem and it frustrated everyone. And I should say, it may still be this way because it was still that way when I left. But those processes build up. And after a while, nobody questions why this process is there. And it's half the time you don't even realize that you should question it. And then the other half the time, you don't feel like you have the psychological safety to question it, or you don't know how to question it. But I think that one thing that we can do as product managers is just ask the difficult questions. Just ask why So why are we doing this? And if someone says, oh, it's the process, like, okay, why is it the process? And use the 5 whys and try to break that down. And oftentimes you can open up a door to discussion. You may have to escalate. This may go up a few levels, but you can start the conversation about how can we try something different? How can we take a small portion of things and do this slightly differently and see if we can still feel safe in what we're doing, but not have this burdensome system that slows us down and makes everybody miserable.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And God, love that story. And I'm sure every company has their equivalent of it. I'm not taking down all the airlines, but
Yeah, no, that
uh,
was not a fun day for anyone. I had, and
but
my product had nothing, I didn't touch anything close to it. And it
yeah,
was still a stressful day for us. Like
yeah,
I was managing an iPhone app at that point. So it was like, we're good to go. But man, it was, you just saw it. And no one, and that's the thing is you have to have empathy for the people who put this into place because the CTO is getting phone calls from the CEOs of the largest airlines in the world, threaten lawsuits and all sorts of, it's just, no one wants to be put through that.
and so as Jock said in the chat here, he said it's a risk avoidance strategy. It applies a plaster, a band-aid for rather than addressing the root cause.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's kind of the risk avoidance version. The other thing that you often also see is consistency. That's the other thing that starts to bring in process and approvals and layers is as the organization grows, there's this feeling of we need to do things consistently. We can't have every team working differently. We can't have every team off on their own, creating their own little tech platform and their own way of working. And the biggest thing that I say, especially when I've gone and do done consulting with some companies of these sizes, why do you need that consistency? We feel like we need it, but no one can explain why. I've never had anyone say it. The closest thing I've gotten is so if someone moves from one team to another, they don't have to start from scratch. And it's just, that will be fine. I promise. They're humans. They are resilient. They will learn the new thing. But we just have this feeling that if this team and this team are doing things differently, the whole world's going to collapse. No, it's not. Just let them do things differently.
I'm really glad you're calling that out because I've seen something similar. I've had conversations with different companies, and the ones that I see that seem to have a better handle on their product management stuff in general seem to be the ones where they let their product teams find their own way. They set the general guidance on how they want to work, but otherwise let the product teams choose their own processes, their own tools, their own spaces, their own ways of working, and they let them figure out their own mix of processes, right? The ones that tend to fail are the ones that, I hate to say it, but try to apply things like safe or try to create the process for everyone to go sit under, which, one size never fits all. I haven't seen it work.
And it's
And
not
so,
built into those frameworks. That's the part that I think is retrospectives and iterations on the process are supposed to be a part of all of those frameworks. But it seems like people internalize that as I can make changes within within the realm of this specific space. As long as it doesn't deviate from the Scrum handbook, we can make whatever changes we want. You can have car in any color as long as it's black, is basically that feeling when it comes to retrospect. You are allowed to change the day of your demo, but you're not allowed to change if you have a demo at all. And that's not the spirit of it. The spirit of it is your team figures out what works for you and you iterate into a process that works.
yeah, and that's actually a really key point is that processes are things that can be iterated. Right? They're like products. You can learn from and measure and improve a product, just like you can learn from and iterate and improve processes, right? And that's the point of retros is a chance to look back on your process and improve them for the next time you go around. Without retros, your processes are just going to continue to stack up and get worse and worse. Whereas if you actually make time for these things and actually talk about what's working and not working, you actually will get hopefully better and better processes.
Definitely.
Yeah. Somebody actually asked a question here. Jacob asked, Do you see a difference between organizations where one or more digital products are the key revenue stream and organizations where they're enablers of a different type of service?
And when I'm curious if you're meaning some like are like platform companies versus other um
I could see how that could be interpreted different ways. I mean, interpret that in terms of like, pure product play companies versus companies that are necessarily digital first, but happen to have products per
yeah,
se.
so example company building technology airlines versus the airlines building technology to fly airplanes. Yes, I'm
That's
with you
something you might know about.
now. Bring it back to my no. It's funny. I haven't worked in the airline industry for a while, but it's where a lot of this has occurred. Actually, airlines and federal government and other large kind of back end operators. So I don't actually see a difference. The main difference between where you're selling the product versus where your product's enabling something else is you're typically not sales led if you're in the my product's enabling something else. But what ends up happening is your customers are the people doing the thing that is being sold. So you end up sales led because you have the people internally who are making a big deal about, oh, I need it to do this and it has to do this by this date. And in fact, in some ways, it may be worse than sales led because they know where to find you and they know how to. I actually did some consulting with a client who their organization had gotten into a habit where everything was escalated and people basically the stakeholders figured out that the way to get anything done was to make it an urgent escalation and therefore they never got to have control of their roadmap because as soon as they would try anything there would be an urgent escalation that they would have to hop on and it took a lot of conversations and a lot of effectively leadership stakeholder management to try to get out of that cycle because people find that shortcut and then they will abuse it if it is allowed to exist.
If everything is a P0, nothing is a P0.
Exactly. So it's just whoever's shouting the loudest today gets to get their thing done.
Yeah. And another question from Jock. He said, any advice for the lone product manager trying to start being agile or nimble when the rest of the company is still stuck in this predictable or waterfall mentality? How can they start making change?
Yeah. So the key thing I would say is just start doing it. So this is what I have done in a couple of different organizations. And you need to be realistic about how much you're going to accomplish in a short period of time. So find your one thing, one or two things that you want to try differently. As much as you can, work with your manager at least to make sure that they're on board. Because if you don't have your management support, this will fail. And if you don't have your management support, honestly, go find somewhere else. It's just, you're never going to make progress. But if you have supportive leadership who's okay with you ruffling some feathers on occasion, then just start trying things. So start figuring out those spaces where you can do some of the things you're reading about or the things that you're seeing that aren't going to raise the hackles or raise huge red flags. So things like user research is a really hard one in a lot of these companies because, again, the sales team wants to keep really tight control over who talks to the customer. And they're really worried they're going to say something that's going to mess up their next renewal. So rather than starting with user interviews, start with usability tests. Start with something that feels like a privilege. We want you to pick a customer to be able to come to us and get to see the thing that we're building before it goes to market and give their feedback on how it works. That feels like something that is a relationship building activity for the salesperson. They can bring the customer in, do the usability test. And what do you do with every usability test? You start with some user interview questions. You start with, tell me about your job. Tell me about how you do these things. Tell me about the process you go through in this realm. And then you do the usability test. So you've gotten in a little bit of a user interview. That salesperson can see, oh, they're not going to ruin my relationship with my customer. And you can slowly start to build in those points where you can do things in a more regular way. The other big one I will say is actually it's appropriate for this webinar is the roadmap. So one of the big sticking points in these big organizations is the date-driven roadmap. And I know, of course, ProdPad is on the mission to get rid of the date-driven roadmap. And I am fully on board in theory. However, I have lived the reality and I have worked with clients who lived the reality where if I just go into one of these big organizations and say, I'm ditching the 12-month roadmap and I'm going to now, next, later with no dates, everyone will lose their mind and you will have zero support and people will just battle you. And a lot of times, especially if you are not the CPO of the company or not the VP of product, you won't be allowed to do it. You will be forced to put dates on your roadmap. So I have gone away of basically doing the now, next, later roadmap with dates, which sounds really weird. Stick with me here for a moment. So I put up my roadmap and it's January through December, and I communicate over and over again. This is not a contract. This is not a document that can be sold to customers today. If something is on the roadmap in the next 3 months, it is in work. We are doing it right now. It is probably going to happen at least within a month of when we say it is right here. And we'll keep you updated on that. If it's in the 3 to 6 month range, there are things that we will probably do, but they may shift around in terms of timing. It's the stuff that we're going to get to next, but we will keep it updated as we get closer to it. So you're welcome to talk about the themes and the direction that we're going in that 3 to 6 months, but maybe not promise dates on those features. If it's past 6 months, it is pure fiction. It is just it's a thought experiment. We are putting it up there to think about our strategy and how we might play out the rest of this year. But there's a good chance that stuff that's on the back half of this roadmap is going to fall off of it before we ever even start building it. And it may not be important. Do not sell that to a customer. Do not give that feature in a contract. Don't tell them it's on the roadmap. It is just for us to illustrate what we're thinking. And so effectively what I've created is 1 to 3 months is now, 3 to 6 months is next, 6+ months is later, but it just is listed with dates. And yes, Jock, do not sell the roadmap. Yes, immediately sells the roadmap. And that actually one of my favorite the things right after in this pandemic in the UK, Boris Johnson putting out the roadmap that is not, he said, it's not dates, it's data. It's not dates, it's based on data. And we're going to open this up no sooner than 5 weeks. And within 10 minutes, I took screenshots. There were articles that said opening day, April 12th, Boris Johnson confirms the roadmap. And that is what will happen. So you have to be really careful with this. And again, you need your leadership support. This won't work if you don't have your leadership support, because you will have a salesperson who will come and put something on the last back half of the roadmap into a contract and then say, oh, you said it, but it was on the roadmap. And so I put it in a contract. Now you have to build it. And you need to have support of your leadership to be able to say, that sounds like a really difficult conversation you're going to have to go have with that customer, but we're not pulling it up just because you wrote it in a contract. Because again, if you then pull it up because they wrote it in the contract, ding, ding, loophole. I can get my thing built if I just go write it in a contract, even if product said I can't do that. So it doesn't take very many instances of that happening before people stop doing it. I think that I had twice where someone tried to force my hand based on something they told a customer, and I had the support of my leadership. And we said, I'm sorry, you're going to have to go back to that customer and sign a change order, figure out how to sell what we've got. But we're not building it just because you wrote it in the contract. We told you not to write it in the contract. And they stopped doing it really quick.
Yeah, I bet. And what you described there is actually a pretty wonderful interpretation of now, next, later. It's what I generally recommend for companies who are trying to do what I call the wean. Weaning off the timeline roadmap in favor of something more lean. And it does take some baby steps, right? And what you're actually doing, the big evil part of the timeline roadmap is that timeline. And the now, next, later, what you've just described there actually removes that instantly. Because the problem with the timeline along the top is that it gives everything a fixed date. And everything on that roadmap that you put on that roadmap instantly has a date. And that date is basically equidistant regardless of how far out it is. The concept of time horizons, these three columns, now, next, and later, is that now are the things that are like in front of you and concrete. So you can give it things like, yeah, this is within the next few months. And you can give that level of concreteness because you're literally working on them as you speak. You're doing the discovery and doing the delivery on them as you go. So you can give that kind of more concreteness to it. If you feel comfortable saying 3 months and putting that at the top of your roadmap, cool. Some people feel less comfortable with that, but it's about giving and taking. Sometimes you have to make those compromises, right? When it comes to the next, again, those are things that are a little bit further on in that horizon. They're a little bit fuzzier, but not, they're still out there. And they're generally in that 3 to 6-ish range, depending on how far out you're going. Again, some people feel comfortable putting dates on them. Some people don't want to put dates on them, but it's a really good way of setting the expectations for what it is that you're actually looking at. And then the later column is actually designed to be that X month and beyond, 3 plus, or whatever you want to call it. And it helps give that frame of mind, which is, look, I'm standing here and we're looking off into the distance. We're not looking at a flat thing of things that are going to be delivered with some sort of concrete finish end line. At the end of the year, we're going to deliver the product and it will be done. The product is never finished. We're trying to build into uncharted waters, uncharted territory here. And we don't know. I can't see how big this thing is going to be. You can't see how big this thing is going to be. These are fuzzy deliverables. And so having that format, just changing the timeline for time horizons, regardless of what you call them, you're taking away the timeline, but not necessarily taking away the concept of time.
Yeah.
But you are reframing it so people understand that this is the fuzzy stuff. And therefore, don't sell it. If you do, it's on you. You're selling something that's way off in the distance. We can't see what that is. We don't know what you just sold. And so that's on you. And so the way that you phrased that was really nice. It's going to be an awkward conversation that you're going to have.
Yeah.
It's off the contract, right?
I think the other side of that, if you're wanting to start going down this path, we're getting into budget planning season. So it's actually a really good time to do this. Keep the receipts, basically. So take the roadmap that you set out in January of this past year. We're now halfway through October. You know how the rest of the year is going to go out. Take a look at how much you've actually delivered of the roadmap you planned in January. So I did this 3 different years in my career, and each time it was about 20%, somewhere in the 20% range of what we thought we were going to build in January is what we actually built at the end of the year in December.
100%.
And I don't consider that a failure. The way that I put it is we were responding to the market. We were learning as we went. We took some things off that didn't make sense. We pulled some things on that did make sense. And that's okay. But it just gives you that sense that this is, you say it all the time. It's one of my favorite things. It's a prototype for your strategy. This is not a plan. This is not a checklist. This is just a way for us to illustrate how we think we're going to get from where we are today to where we would like to be at the end of the year. You're welcome to use my 20% mark, but take a look at your own. And I think that you'll probably find it's a very similar stat.
And as someone who's seen a lot of roadmaps, I can tell you that is about representative. Yeah, that's normal. And come whatever sort of attempts that people have tried to make as well, with whatever sort of attempts people have tried to make, I haven't seen a team ever deliver their roadmap. I've never seen a team stand at the front of the year and go, this is the roadmap and we're going to go deliver it. And I remember I used to think that I was a failing product manager because I could never deliver my roadmap. And so my early product management years was just trying to figure out how I got that delivery piece right, because I thought that everyone else made a roadmap. So I saw everyone else making roadmaps, and then they went and delivered it. And I thought, oh, why can't I deliver it?
That's funny. I've never actually internalized, but I definitely felt like that at the beginning of my career too. Oh, I'm failing at this because I put this roadmap out and I did not get the stuff done. I said it was going to get done. Nobody does.
Nobody does. The penny did not drop until about 5 years in my career. And I was like, oh, I feel so much better for that. I did not deliver any of this stuff. Yeah. It's okay though. No one else did. What the important thing that we were adapting and learning as we went. The thing is, we just didn't have the vocabulary. I didn't have the vocabulary back then to describe what it was I was doing. I just looked like I was flailing about. And what hindsight, what I was doing, I was experimenting and adjusting and iterating and learning, but I couldn't really tell my superiors that. I didn't really know how to. So hopefully product managers of today have a better vocabulary and are more equipped to really use these tools to their advantage.
Definitely.
Actually, Bala has an interesting take on the roadmap here. The roadmap is for after delivery, as in what we delivered. Interesting way to think about it. And I like that, actually. One of the facets that we have in ProdPad is what we call the completed roadmap. So the only time that you can see a timeline on your roadmap, this concept of direct time to your roadmap, is the history roadmap, the completed roadmap, where it shows all the things that you've completed in the past and, of course, the outcomes of each thing. Because that's really helpful if you want to look back on what you've done in the past. If anybody does R&D tax credits or just wants to see what kind of things they released in the last few years, it's super helpful to be able to go back and see what you did deliver and make that little marker to say, we did this, we ran these experiments, these ones failed, these ones passed, and here was the overall outcome. And be able to go back however many years you've been tracking that roadmap.
We did a product review is what we called it, where every 6 weeks, because month was too short, 2 months was too long. Every 6 weeks, we would invite the entire sales organization, marketing, biz dev, everyone, and we would go through everything that we had done in the last 6 weeks. But a lot of times we would keep things on for a while. And it was not as much about what we were going to do, although we would cover that, but the bulk of the meeting, it was an hour and a half, and the bulk of it was spent going through everything that we had done, what we thought it was going to bring us at when we decided to do it, and what the actual results were to date, which again also served the purpose of holding our partners accountable when they brought us things, because don't tell me I'm going to put it on a slide in front of your colleagues if you come in and tell me this is going to drive 500,000 new users, and then I'm going to say what actually happened. But then the other side of it was it held us accountable too, because as product managers, we want to build all the fun stuff. And it's actually the secret is the thing that no one really wants to say is working in a feature factory can be really fun as a product manager, because you just get to build stuff and nobody cares if you drove results. It's not a good thing to do. It's a huge waste of money and it's not fulfilling as a career, but it can be really fun to just get to be like, I want to build this feature. Okay, let's go do it. So holding yourself accountable is just as important as holding those stakeholders accountable.
And you're right, it's super addictive too. This is why companies end up in feature factories, because when you're a tiny company, you start off as a feature factory. You have to, I think, because when you start, you have no product, and then you're like, let's build this product. It needs these 5 features. Cool, build 5 features. And people are like, this is great. Let's put this on Product Hunt. You build a 6th feature and your product is 20% better. Awesome. Let's put this on Product Hunt again. Great, wonderful. You build a 7th feature and it's so much better. Each feature you add makes it better and better, which feels great when it's only got 10 features. Each new feature is giving you a chance to write a press release, and each new feature is giving you a chance to reach out to your early adopters. And early adopters love this stuff as well. And so you're building these new features in, and people are loving it, and your sales are going up, and your downloads are going up, or whatever you're trying to do here. All the numbers are going in the right direction. But then you get to feature number 20, 30, 40, and then people stop noticing the new features because they're just crushing each other. And you're trying to support the old features and they're colliding with each other. And you'd run into the fact that you've just got this Frankenstein of a product that no longer is competitive. It's no longer usable. It's no longer easy to support. And you've built up this whole habit within your team that the only thing you know how to do is build new features. You haven't actually checked which of those first 10 features actually got their attention. Maybe only 3 of them were actually useful, but you still kept the other 5, the other 3, and you didn't bother peeling out the bad ones. And you just kept adding on newer ones. And so these companies that started off as feature factories continue to do so because it's what worked for them in the early days. And they never get that discipline. They never learn to build and curate their product. They just learn to build, which I think is obviously a bad habit to carry on with.
I think it took me a long time to learn about sunsetting features and killing the zombie features. And I had a developer who I will forever remember that his favorite thing was deleting code. He could write incredible code, but he was like, it is so exciting when I get to delete code out of this code base. And features that we hit, he would push us to figure out a sunset plan for a feature that nobody was using. And then it would be like the day we could go say, okay, Sean, you get to delete the code, his eyes would light up and he'd go delete a bunch of code. It's just
great. What an asset. What an awesome person to have on your team.
Feature deleting is addictive too. It really is. People don't do it enough.
That's great. That's great. Does anybody have any other questions? If you want, drop them into the Q&A. In the meantime, you tipped me off about this article that you have coming out next month, which is about the mysterious they.
Yeah.
What's this article going to be about? Who are they?
Well, that's the question that nobody can seem to answer. They is the most powerful person in these large organizations, which is basically someone, you hear it all the time of, oh, they'll never let us do that. Oh, they're not going to let you release that today. And the thing about it is there is no they. Nobody's actually asked the question. They're just making assumptions or wanting to shut down the conversation. And I had one case, I will say, I probably didn't handle it in the most relationship building way, but I was fed up with it. It literally was a release issue that we had a feature that was really important for our user base. Our data center was in a freeze for some reason, and we needed to get this out. And basically it was like, well, you need to file an exception request. And I was like, okay, well, what do I need to do that? And they're like, well, it needs to have at least $250,000 of revenue impact or impact some however many users. And I was like, well, this doesn't do that because my product was a small thing and one part of the company. And they were like, they won't let us do it if it doesn't have at least $250,000 of impact. And I was just in the middle of our open office floor plan going, who is they? Just tell me who they is. I want to talk to they. And the guy I was talking to said, what do you mean? I was like, who is they? Is they our CTO? And named her. And I will go talk to Deborah and tell her what needs to happen. And he was like, well, no, she doesn't get involved in this. Okay. And I walked down the org chart of, okay, so then the next of the SVP over us is this person. Is that they? No. And I walked it down into effectively, he finally said, I don't know. I'm assuming that they won't let us. I was like, okay, let's find someone we can ask the question of and have a conversation about this because this rule makes no sense. And as I thought more about it, I realized that they is a tool that gets used to, first of all, half the time people they really think that there is something in place that is immovable. And so they don't ask the question. And let's just start by asking the question and having the conversation. In the worst cases, it's used as a conversation ender. You can't argue with they. They is not here. I'm not they. I'm deferring my decision to them. So you can't be mad at me. And it just shuts down productive collaboration. Now, I would not recommend yelling in the middle of an open office floor plan, who is they? I want to speak to they. But I do think that you can start asking that question. So who is the person who can make this decision? If it's not you, tell me who it is, because I'm going to go talk to them. So that is my rant that I've been on for years about the mysterious they. And don't bring they into your conversation either. So don't use it to shut other people down. Or if you start finding yourself saying they're not going to let us do that, ask yourself, who do I think is they? Who do I think is the person who can help make this decision different?
I love that. Because I think it's really empowering for product people to really start understanding who it is that's calling the shots, that are making the decisions, and helping them to ask the questions around why decisions are being made in their organization. I think really powerful thing to end on. Thank you so much for that. And I look forward to that article being posted. Is that going to be up on Mind the Product?
It will be up on mindtheproduct.com. I think sometime in November, where Our editorial calendar is There.
We'll be dropping the link in the transcript for this thing when it comes live. Keep an eye on this page when it goes live. Everybody who's watching this video in the future, it'll be here. And in the meantime, thank you everybody for taking the time to join today. We run these things on a generally every couple weeks or so. The next one is going to be, I've got the date here. The next webinar is going to be about how to get out of the weeds as a product leader. So if you're a product leader and you are constantly in the details and you're trying to figure out how to give your team that space. So we're going to be talking about that on November 17th, which is a Wednesday, but it's going to be same time as now, same place. And that's going to be with Salesled and Silva. Join us back here for that. And in the meantime, thank you everybody for taking part and joining us here in the chat and for your questions. And Emily, thank you so much for joining us here today as our product expert. It's been wonderful to get a chance to chat with you.
Thank you.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you all. Take care. Have a good one.
Bye.